Thank you for listening to the Ramble On Podcast Network. The following podcast was produced by members of the Highland Rambler from Highland High School in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Hey.
Hey.
I'm Malia Hansen. I'm a junior and I'm Asian and Pacific Islander.
And I'm Abby Khatri. I'm a senior at Highland and I'm Nepali.
Welcome to our podcast about the BIPOC experience at Highland High, the BIPOC-cast.
Every episode will feature a different community and a student from that community. Today we'll be talking about the Black community here at Highland.
And joining us today, we've got Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah Pace. I'm a freshman and I am half Black.
Thanks for joining us.
Woohoo!
So our first question is, what is the Black community's place at Highland?
So in terms of representation at school, I found that there's not many students or teachers that are Black. And I think that's, a lack of Black students makes the students who are Black feel like they stand out, I guess. Like, I definitely feel that when I'm at school. And a lack of Black teachers, I think that's bad because, especially when we're younger, when we see a teacher, we automatically think that they're smart, because they're, like, teaching us what we need to know. So if we don't see a lot of teachers that are Black, that's bad for all students because they're not going to immediately associate a Black person with a teacher, which could mean it could indirectly go to them thinking that they aren't as smart. And also, if Black students see teachers who don't look like them, that's gonna be a toxic thing for them too, because it's gonna be hard for them to see themselves like trying to be a teacher or like something when they're older. And it could make them feel sort of insecure in that way or like feel less smart if they only see teachers who don't look like them.
Yeah, that's so true. Representation is so important. And since you did move here from somewhere else, how do you feel it's different at Highland from where you lived before?
Well, actually, at Highland, I think there's more representation of the Black community and just people of color in general, because from where I moved, which was Portland, Oregon, the Black community didn't really have a place. I was one of the only students of color out of the 3 schools that I went to, which was crazy
Wow.
for me.
Ooh.
Yeah. It wasn't great. It definitely made me feel like I didn't fit in, and it made me like insecure in a way, if that makes sense, because like when you stand out like that, it's not easy to like relate to people, make friends, stuff like that. And also like racism was kind of an issue in Oregon, not just for the Black community, but like the thing that they kind of did where I lived was like they would push it under the rug or like ignore like the issues, like so that people wouldn't be aware and it wouldn't be like a big deal or whatever. But obviously racism is a big deal, and so I definitely think Highland is doing better than the schools I've previously been at, but like I said, there's still not a lot of representation at school.
Definitely. We've got another question that's kind of related. Like, what's a stereotype that the Black community faces?
Well, a stereotype that I think has affected me most throughout my life is that I should be like loud and quote unquote sassy. I don't know how this stereotype was formed, but I think it's really toxic, like all stereotypes, and it's not fair. Like people will just assume of me that I'm loud and outgoing, and really I'm like the opposite. And like I'm sure many members of the Black community or anyone of like anyone who has to suffer from stereotypes can relate to that. Most of my life I've been told like, wow, you're so passive or you're so quiet or when I first saw you, it was kind of intimidating and I thought you were always mad. And like I know people aren't trying to be rude when they say that kind of thing, but I hate those type of comments and it really annoys me that I'm expected to be a certain way. And like I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And like if we're all just people, I don't know why we can't like meet someone and not immediately have this pre-existing idea about them. And obviously stereotypes are really harmful because how they make people see others. And so to remove stereotypes like that completely, I think we need to stop putting people into categories and assuming things about them because I definitely get a lot of things assumed about me because of how I look and I really just I don't think it's fair and I don't think it should be that way.
Definitely. Stereotypes in general just are so confusing and hard to navigate.
Yeah.
And I guess that kind of brings us back to like teachers, because I feel like by having more teachers who are Black and, just not white in general, that
Mhm.
helps students see that, people of color can reach these higher positions and be educators and accomplish anything that anybody else can. But
Yeah, I agree with
I
that.
kind of wanted to ask you another question about that. Like, how have teachers influenced you, or like, what positivity do you think teachers would bring by having more diverse teachers?
Well, okay, first I'll answer how have teachers influenced me. So obviously, I've been a student for a few years now. And I remember when I was younger, I thought teachers were like, well, okay, I still think they're amazing. But like, I don't know. I thought they were like, like they were put on a really high pedestal in my mind.
Like
Mhm.
superheroes.
Yeah, yeah, like superheroes. And so, it was really important to me, especially to have a teacher that was like good for me, that was a good fit for me, that like a teacher who I could like talk to, and definitely having a teacher that I could relate to. That was always really nice for me. A teacher that liked me and taught in a way that I understood. And so yeah, teachers have influenced me a lot throughout my life, obviously, because I've been a student for a while now. And I think it's mostly been in a positive way because, like, I'm learning things from them that I wouldn't already know. And then, sorry, what was your second question?
Oh, you're good.
Mm.
I also kind of forgot, so we can just move on.
Okay.
Yeah. How do you think Highland is doing with teachers and diversifying them?
Um, I think we could always do better because I feel like, a majority of my teachers are not people of color, but from where I came from, I had only, before moving here, I had only had one teacher who was a person of color like my entire life, my entire school career. So I think Highland is actually doing we're doing okay in that aspect, but I think we could definitely do better. I'm not just talking the black community, I'm talking like just more teachers of color so that students of color can see themselves in the teacher.
Yeah. Um, I'd also like to ask, like, being in these classrooms where most of the kids are white, like, um, how does it feel, for example, when we like have conversations about the civil rights movement or like the history of slavery or the history of the Black community in the United States? Like, I don't know, I guess just kind of like, what's the issue with there only being white students in that conversation or being like the only Black student in the room?
Okay, I'm gonna go off my experience from my other schools because I haven't had a lot of that at Highland yet, but it's actually a very awkward dynamic. Like, it's hard for me. like when we talk about slaves, like, slavery, civil rights, stuff like that, there's always going to be people that are like looking at me like out of the corner of their eye, and it's just weird, and that in itself is so awkward. But then like to hear like a teacher talking about it and sort of sharing their opinion on it whenever they don't have the history of that in their family, so that's also a weird dynamic. And then while learning about it, sometimes I feel like we're just not sensitive enough in the classroom. And like I know how that sounds, but things like reading a book about integration, and then the teacher will say like, "Oh, you can say the N-word while reading this because it like teaches us and it like helps us learn a lesson." Like, no. Stuff like that, like I'm like, "No, that's not going to help us learn any better about how bad it was." And that's not going to make anyone who can't really relate like fully understand how like what it was like and what it still is like sometimes.
For sure. Well, that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much for coming on and telling us a little bit about your community.
Yeah, thank you for having me.